Now, we've talked about all of these black communities that were thriving in America before racism took them all out, or eminent domain, which is also racism. This town, this community in Brooklyn, one of the most potent, powerful, viable communities, called Weeksville. And this gentleman joining us right now is the president and executive director of the Weeksville Heritage Center. Let me welcome to the show for the first time, Mr. Rob Fields. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Karen. Oh, I'm muted now?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me? Oh,
yes,
great,
we can.
great. Thank you, first of all, for the kind and generous invitation to join you and your millions of listeners here. Thank you. Quite an honor. And what a surprise I get to be in conversation with you and Lurie Daniel Favors. So, this is extra treat. This is like such a great day. So
I was very glad to see you were going to be on today.
So y'all know each other. See, I don't be knowing when I'm reaching out who knows who, but the divine order of things puts it all in. Well, you got to know if you're out there fighting for justice, Lurie, and he's out there preserving, that you guys, your paths will cross. I should have known that.
And it's 2 degrees of separation among black people. It's just,
that is true.
Or one,
right. Depending
on who you're talking about.
Right. And if you're Tyler Perry, it's no degrees. Everybody knows
right.
him. So tell me, Rob, how did you become this guy to preserve this? First, tell us about Weeksville for people who don't know about Weeksville.
Yes. So Weeksville was an intentional community that was founded in 1838 in what is now Crown Heights in Brooklyn, and it was founded by a guy named James Weeks, who got together with a group of other black investors and bought land from the Lefferts family. The Lefferts, the Garrettsons, and all those Dutch landowning families owned tons of land in the 18th and 19th century in Brooklyn. And when they founded Weeksville, when they bought the land in 1838, it was only 11 years after slavery had been abolished in New York State. And their idea was to create this intentional community, so they advertised it through the growing network of black newspapers to black people all over the country, and saying, "Come here, we are building this community." And so that's how they got started. And they sold the subdivisions of the land to these black people that were coming here. Eventually, the word got out that Weeksville is a place you could be safe, so it was a stop on the Underground Railroad. Along the way, and we still haven't gotten to the actual Civil War or anything, owning $250 or more worth of land in those times in the early 1800s, in the mid 1800s, gave black men the right to vote. So land ownership came with some measure of political power. During this time, the people in Weeksville are not only building community, but they're also building institutions. So you see Weeksville having schools. They had a newspaper, had baseball teams. They had an orphanage, a retirement home, and 3 churches that still exist to this day came out of historic Weeksville, all built before 1900 and the turn of the 20th century. Berean, Bethel, and St. Philip's, which are all, you can still go to any one of them on Sunday and praise Jesus. It is, and I like to say, and I'm reminded by my incredible staff that institution building is a form of resistance, and so they were building institutions because institutions help keep memories alive. Institutions carry forward memories of a community beyond the lifespan of the people who built them, and so that's why they're so important. And so Weeksville thrives as a predominantly black area for quite some time. By 1898, you see the unification of Brooklyn, where it becomes one Brooklyn. By the 1930s, Weeksville kind of disappears due to gentrification and, again, that coming together of Brooklyn. So it goes from being 88% black in like the 1850s to only 30% black by the 1930s. And
pause for a second, Rob, because this keeps happening. Rob Fields is with us. He's the president and executive director of Weeksville Heritage Center. As you talk about building institutions, there has to be some sustainability. We can't keep finding ourselves in places where gentrification, eminent domain, where there's this kind of powerlessness to people coming in and destroying.
Mm-hmm.
How did that happen? How did it just happen? You own the land, right? This is your town. You have your boundaries and your borders. You have your schools and your churches and your places where you guys gather. How does it become from 80% to 30% in just a couple of decades?
Well, it was more than actually a couple of decades, because remember, the foundation was 1838, and so we're talking by, say, 1930. So it lasted as its own area for almost 100 years. And I think in many ways it happens the way that it happens now. People, Weeksville was always had a small contingent of Eastern European immigrants, so Polish, German immigrants who lived in Brooklyn. And so, people would move in, and over time, as the neighborhood changes, boundaries shift, and, people sold or maybe in some cases had property taken from them. But, it happens the way it happens now, in the same way that we are seeing Brooklyn when you have people who've lived in brownstone for years, and they're like, I want to move to Florida and I just want an easier life. And so, they sell and they take top dollar. And because of real estate prices, people are, they take the best deal that they get. And quite often that deal is not to people that look like us, or it's not with the intention of selling to people that look like us. Now, that's kind of the changing and evolving nature of Brooklyn. Because Weeksville was not a specific town, it was more of a community.
Mm-hmm. Which is what I want to piggyback on, because before you got here, Rob, Lurie was talking about in the first hour, Hebrew schools and how communities are fiercely protective of their culture. Is it that we don't value that space enough? Because my dad grew up in Newark, and he would say you would cross an imaginary border into Bloomfield, and you would get your ass whooped. You couldn't come in. Like they drew a line in the sand. You cross this boundary here at Grove Street or what have you into Bloomfield, you're getting your ass whooped, and you got to go back to your side. We let people in, set up businesses, and I'm not saying it's wrong, because I think as a group we are not thinking, oh, well, they're coming in and that means less dollars are circulating in our community, or we're selling, as you said, top dollar because, I can get land cheaper and less taxes and there's no income tax in Florida, so we're going to move and take $1 million for this brownstone. Who wouldn't do that? Whereas other communities understand the power of community, and maybe they don't sell out, and if you come in, they're going to whoop your ass. I'm not saying that I condone that, but I'm just saying that happened to my father.
Yeah, and I don't want to, this is a space for some complex conversations, so let's try and have that to the extent that we can. I think that, Black people, unfortunately, have always been in a position of trying to survive in an antagonistic environment that is the United States, and always has been. And so with that in mind, we've not always had the luxury to think about, I want to do things this way. Sometimes it's about expediency. Sometimes it's about survival. A lot of times it's about survival. And it's also about dealing with the lack of resources and investment in our community. And so I don't think that it is fair to say that, well, Black people just didn't care. I mean, I think Black people definitely care about their neighborhoods, but it's about trying to make choices that, whereas a white family may have more options, that maybe Black families don't. But I don't think it's done thoughtlessly. I think that, my sense is that Black people they would like to sell to somebody white, but at the same time, just given the trends, they'd like to sell to somebody Black, but, they're also trying to, in a sort of capitalist construct, they've got a real estate broker who's saying, I can get you these 3 deals are over $1 million for your house. and I think you should take this one. And then because the real estate broker has a dog in that race too. The bigger the sale price, the bigger that percentage. So, I mean, it takes somebody with a lot of forethought to say, I would like to sell to somebody black and have that in my mind, that you are going to look for that among the offers that come in, and that's in some ways, I think, a luxury, particularly given the price of housing today. And I don't know what prices were like back then, but I always think it's like a complicated conversation to have. And I want to push back against the notion that black people don't care, because we do care, and we want safe environments for our children, and we want to be able to shop and enjoy amenities in our neighborhoods. I mean, so, it's just all complicated by this place called the United States.
And I think that, just to add another layer of complication on it, I think we should have a moment where we sort of reimagine what it means to have community, right? Yes, community can be a geographic place, but if I am a senior and I have been a part of building up this community, let's say Bedford-Stuyvesant, for the past, 30, 40, 50 years, and I have an opportunity to now sell this property, which maybe my family bought 2 generations ago. My children are not necessarily interested in maintaining it. They've moved on, and I have the ability to net $1 million and pick up and move down south where I'd rather live. I don't have to worry about the maintenance cost of this property here. I am going to move down south to another black community, maybe, and be a part of building that space up. And now I have disposable income that I can use to sort of help seed additional growth opportunities for family members in other spaces. So even though, when we talked at the beginning of the hour about the Jewish community having Hebrew schools, Jewish people often, there's often conversation about how they are a nomadic community, and that no matter where they go, they are carrying the spirit of those institutions with them. And so I think that if we're looking at sort of and I don't like to compare across cultures, but if we were looking at something instructive, I think we could ask, do we have the spirit of the institutions and the know-how to replicate them wherever so we may find ourselves? And if we have an opportunity to financially invest in other ways, can we do that while maintaining the basic principles that underline what healthy community and development looks like?
I think that's really powerful. And the reverse redlining is not the option, is not the answer either. Because as you're talking about, I was like, that's black supremacy to just sell to black people. That makes us no better than the people that are only selling to the white folk. And we need to, at some point, start to look at a world that we want to live in from a fair perspective. I hate to God that we have these racial constructs that we have to consider, at every turn, that there's this pall over this country, where we can't even be free to live wherever we want to live without having to consider all of these things. But
I wouldn't say it's black supremacy, though. I mean, I think it was a joke, Lurie. I know. I just, for the record, just think it's self-preservation. Black supremacy would be if we was putting up ankhs and burning incense on white people's lawns to rush them out of the community. That might be black supremacy. But selling among ourselves, I think is perfectly fine. For the record, I'm bowing out here.
Okay. All right. So okay. All right. Fine. And if you put go home. No, never mind. Let me not keep going with it because then I got imagination. We're talking with Lurie, of course, Lurie Daniel Favors, Afro State of Mind at the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College in Brooklyn, New York, 5th largest city, if it were its own city in the country. And of course, president and executive director of the Weeksville Heritage Center, Rob Fields. Rob, are you a native Brooklynite?
I am not. I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, but I've been in New York 30-odd years, so I feel like I'm a native New Yorker, and I feel like I've earned my stripes. And so as a New Yorker, because I can't imagine living anywhere else. So y'all stuck with me.
Why Brooklyn?
Why not? I'd say, why not? I lived in Brooklyn initially when I got here because some college friends of mine suggested that. We found a place. I went from, Park Slope to Fort Greene. I met, who's to be my then wife, and who's been my wife and partner over 26 years. I moved to Manhattan with her, and when our first child was born, we came back to Brooklyn in search of affordable space and whatnot, and so we moved around, and Yeah, Brooklyn, where it's at. Brooklyn's the center of the world, center of the universe. You knew that, right?
Listen. Shout out to Brooklyn. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the communities in Brooklyn, all of them. The most important thing about being the director of the center at Weeksville, what is it, Rob?
Well, it's understanding that you play multiple roles, and that Weeksville functions in various ways. We are an historic house museum. We're an historic site. We're also a cultural center. And, I think that all those three different aspects, have to be managed and given their due. The history is super duper important, as a way of grounding people's understanding, and particularly Black people's understanding of the accomplishments that we have, in terms of building a base of knowledge and a base of inspiration. Because, hey, look what these Black people did in an age before emancipation and the internet and iPhones, right? So if they did that and built these institutions, what can we do today? What can we do to take that inspiration and build on that? At the same time, we also have this opportunity to be cultural presenters and bring great examples of Black excellence and Black culture and Black conversation and Black engagement to Central Brooklyn. So one of my big things has always been, you shouldn't have to go to Manhattan to see great Black art, see great Black literature and Black film. We've been trying to really be and function as that space where you can see great examples of Black culture. You can come and celebrate. Every year we do, have the opening ceremonies for Dance Africa. We work with a lot of community groups, like the Fulton Art Fair was supposed to do a show in May, but of course COVID kind of messed that up. We've done conversations on reparations. I feel like we can't have those conversations at Weeksville. Where can we have them? So you can explore the breadth of Black culture through this lens of this Black community, sort of grounding yourself in some of the principles and the examples and the inspiration. And then that helps you think about the future, which gets back to the thing that I think you were saying earlier about imagination, and it is so incredibly important to help lay this groundwork, with, school-age students to adults to folks who may come in, all from around the world to visit Weeksville and see the historic Hunterfly Road houses, is that the history is meant to be a base to expand your imagination about what can be. And that's what we have to, always be pushing towards, not so much in this world of, well, we are against racism because we're against institutional racism. But what are we for? We're for safe communities where it's not necessarily about defunding the police. It's about having a broader conversation about what does public safety look like and what is needed. What does a fully engaged community look like? What are healthy communities looking like, and how do we contribute to that? And that's, by showing examples of what has been done in the past, we get to a point where people can take that inspiration and say, oh, they did that, so maybe I can take that piece of this and apply this over here and try this, and knowing that there's an historical antecedent for something, and that's kind of the work that we're trying to do. And also to fill in, on the other hand, we're also trying to fill in pieces of Black history, New York City history, and American history, because at the same time we're talking about all this, we are reasserting the role that Black people played in building America here. And that is all of that is super important to do and to maintain. And holding space. The last thing I'll say is holding space is not a given in an evolving Brooklyn. And so we are, grateful for the community that has supported us through, the Joan Maynard days back in the day, to the community that came out to save the houses in the 60s, to Joan Maynard's leadership, she passed on to Pam Green, and then to Tia Powell Harris, and then I've been able to, make my small contribution into what should be a long history of Weeksville. It's not stopping here. It's just a few blips on the timeline. Weeksville should exist, ad infinitum.
And I would say for people who are not familiar with the space, it is absolutely stunning to sort of be in that part of Brooklyn, and then you happen upon this. It's the building itself. I know that with the renovations, and it has just been a phenomenal space to hold events. And if you go to the website, you can see a lot of the work that's done there. And I would just say your leadership has definitely continued that legacy of greatness. And I think what always strikes me about Weeksville is that to have your own Black orphanage, to have your own Black-owned senior center spaces at a time, as you said, before Google, before civil rights movement, before emancipation in many ways. Those things, to me, really do speak to the power of Sankofa, looking back to our past, seeing what we have done, and using that information to let us know what we have done in the past, we can do again better, bigger, in ways that are even more beneficial now because we have the benefit of that history and that legacy to stand on. So I would echo everything that was just said.
It requires us
we're
respecting.
We're all standing on the shoulders of giants, and
That's right.
I am reminded of that. Well, I haven't been in the office, regularly since March, but, the benefit I have is, the way my office is situated, I have to only turn to my right and I see the historic houses. So I'm reminded of what those incredible people built. I'm reminded of the amazing work that my predecessors as executive director have done. I see why, the staff is working so hard to build programs and, build capacity at this institution, because it is important to maintain and continue this story, because so many people don't know the story of what happened here in Brooklyn, that we were a haven for the draft riots of 1863, the big fight between Daniel Day-Lewis and Leonardo DiCaprio at the end of Gangs of New York. Those are the draft riots, and Black people were, in the midst of getting lynched and murdered. They were fleeing to Brooklyn, into places like Weeksville for haven, for safe haven. And people in Weeksville, while they were building these communities, they were also still very much involved in every major struggle for equality, from, the abolition of slavery to the right to vote to women's suffrage. They didn't hide away from the world, even though they had their own community. And so that is, an example that, we carry forward. And I know many other people and many folks who are in the listening audience certainly carries that forward as well. So Weeksville's been part of that struggle for equality as well.